So, hello everyone to my literature review presentation today. I'm going to try to be really quick because I could talk about this for about an hour and this presentation is already longer than it needs to be. But I just wanted to say as a prologue to the introduction that this presentation regards some metaphysical ideas as opposed to physical ideas that might be directly relevant to the science we're familiar with. But I think nonetheless it is very important as a human, but also as a scientist specifically, to be aware of the deep metaphysical assumptions that we hold and understand the world through. So some of the following ideas are often associated with pseudoscience in the West, which is quite unfortunate in my opinion. So I encourage you to proceed with an open mind. So to start things off, I would like to pause for a moment and encourage you to focus on your senses and notice that the only type of thing you are familiar with are the emergent forms of consciousness. And what I mean by that is that your fundamental epistemological mechanism through which you know everything is via appearance in consciousness. So it's through experience. And I'll get back to this and explain why that's very important. So first, let me put things on the table and discuss the difference between physical and metaphysical ideas. Physics or science regards the behavior of physical reality. In other words, it describes how the universe works, whereas metaphysics regards the nature of reality, essentially it describes or attempts to describe what the universe is. To bring this home a little bit, quantum mechanics describes an electron in terms of its behavior, so what it does and how it interacts, but it doesn't and cannot make a claim about what an electron is. So the big takeaway in this point and also in the exercise we just did is to disentangle behavior from nature. These are the physical and the metaphysical ideas are distinct, but they're very often conflated, especially in science. And this might become a bit more clear retrospectively when we think about a world where our best conceptual ideas of physics to fit the data that we had led us to believe or led us to understand that the sun revolved around the earth and that we're in the center of the universe. And while that described the behavior of our data, there was an implicit metaphysical assumption embedded in that, which gave us intellectual permission to also make a claim about the nature of the world, nature of nature, if you will. So we understood the behavior, but we made an implicit metaphysical claim that is how the world really is, as opposed to behaving from our vantage point. So the important distinction here is that while the concept and the equation that is the Navier-Stokes equation describes a vortex, it is not a vortex. Equally, the Dirac equations describe the behavior of the quarks, but they aren't a quark. And in a similar sense, the word red or the concept of red or the idea is not the direct experience of red. It's not the isness of it. It is a conceptual mapping on to that experience. So the approach of mainstream science is heavily influenced by the zeitgeist or the historical context in which we live. And like I mentioned, there's some deeply held metaphysical assumptions that I'd like to discuss today. So for a long time, to put some words to it, we followed a reductionist method or approach that seemed to verify the intuitive materialist worldview that the West holds. Reductionism being the concept that you can describe any phenomena as a product of its subordinate components. So you can describe a vortex in terms of molecules and so on down to the smallest level. But being able to describe any phenomena that occurs through the mechanisms of the material world, which is where this materialist paradigm comes from, that we interact with the physical world, and that by understanding the smallest building blocks, we will be able to, at some point, describe any phenomena that comes out of it. So as we know, this has led us down sort of the smallest and the biggest rabbit hole of describing both length scales that constitute the physical world. And there's been a deliberate and very useful effort to remove the observer from that equation, because we've recognized that the human mind is limited and it's biased, and we can do a better job by removing the mind and letting our experiments do the job for us. But the big elephant in the room is the phenomena which allows us to do the science in the first place, or which allows us to know anything or make any, to do anything. There is no science without the phenomena of consciousness or the state of awareness, which according to this materialist worldview is just another phenomena within the possible phenomena that emerge from matter. So like I mentioned, we've got this hierarchy of structures that we've got different disciplines to describe the behavior of which. But the important thing is that now, after about a century of very little development in fundamental physics, we're realizing, okay, the concept of the atomos is no longer valid. There isn't a smallest indivisible thing. We're starting to question what a thing is, because at these length scales, the dynamics of quarks are much better described as dynamics, as patterns of energy or interactions, as opposed to things that you can keep breaking down into smaller bits. But there's also many issues that come with it, and scientists are realizing, okay, there's an issue here. The concepts of space-time start breaking down at certain length scales, where we have more and more evidence of things like non-locality that suggests some connectivity of our reality that is deeper than what we understand space-time to be. Sort of the reality behind the wave function, which we recognize as not being a physical thing. The question that is raised is what is it? Where is it? What is the nature of the wave function? Where is this potentiality stored? Because we recognize, okay, the maths doesn't suggest it's in space-time. There's a strong intuition in physics at the moment that there's some level beneath it that could reconcile these issues, as well as potentially lead to a grand unified mathematical theory, which would maybe even include consciousness, because people are becoming aware of this fact that while we've very usefully removed consciousness to understand this hierarchy, where does consciousness as a phenomena fit in? Because as a matter of experience, physics appears in consciousness, but as a matter of our metaphysical assumptions, consciousness must appear in physics. So to lay out on the table the sort of the metaphysical possibilities, taking a step back from this nested hierarchy of physical systems, what is everything? If you imagine a circle and everything is in that circle, what is that everything made out of? What is the stuff? So the two primary camps are that of dualism and monism. Dualism being the idea that all of reality is made out of two categorically different things. So that is matter stuff and mind stuff, or physical stuff and mental stuff, or subject stuff and object stuff. On the other hand, monism comes in a few different flavors, where the idea is that all of reality is made out of one thing. In the case of physicalism, that is matter, and mind is an emergent property of it, but it is fundamentally, categorically the same thing as matter. In the case of idealism, everything in our circle is mind stuff, and matter is an emergent property of it, but is fundamentally no different from mind stuff. And finally, as a catch-all, neutral monism suggests that there might be a third substance that is fundamental, and both what we perceive as matter and mind are emergent phenomena of it, but they're fundamentally, categorically the same thing as that third unknown substance. So I want to highlight some of the issues because most of mainstream science lies in the camps of Cartesian duality and physicalism. Often, if not thought about explicitly, there can be some mishmash of these two views, but here I'd like to exemplify the philosophical and explanatory problems with this family of perspectives. So first of all, there's the well-known hard problem of consciousness, also known as the problem of hard emergence, which is how can subject emerge from object. I'll refrain from explaining each of these because of time, but then there's also an explanatory problem, which is the question of how can subject be explained in terms of object. How can you explain something from a different category in terms of the primary category, if you will. Again, you can draw a mapping through neural correlates, for example. We know that there's neural correlates that map physical states to subject states, or the other way around. That we know there's a correlation, but again, we can't mistake the map for the territory. There's a fundamental issue in explaining the nature of subject in terms of object. Then there's also the interaction problem, which is specifically an issue for dualistic worldview, which is also known as the mind-matter paradox, which raises the question of, okay, what is this interaction mechanism? Because if we have all of reality, and there's all the physical stuff, and then all the mental stuff, what kind of thing can exist, what kind of mechanism can exist between those? Because that mechanism, at least from a philosophical standpoint, seems to necessitate something that is neither mental nor physical in nature in order for there to be a connection. And we know there's a connection. So, and finally, in terms of the assumptions, and this kind of brings me back to the exercise we did at the start, there's a fundamental assumption that to explain the physical world that we share, or to explain the appearance of a physical world that we share, that there exists a physical world that is beyond our experience. That sounds weird because we think, but no, it's not beyond our experience. The physical world is right here. But as we've concluded, our fundamental epistemology of the world is that of consciousness, and to explain our shared awareness of a world, we've presupposed the existence of an inert, dead, if you will, physical world that is beyond our experience, that both of our experiences map onto through our senses. And yeah, so what do we want, right? What do we want as a scientist? I think is an important question, because we can feel very connected to these ideas, but ultimately what I care about, and I think what science cares about, is having a parsimonious model for the data that we have. We want to be as frugal with our assumptions as possible and have a conceptual model that raises the fewest problems or contradictions as possible. So what can we do? What are some approaches that people have come up with? And that brings me to the literature review, but I promise it's only 3 more slides after this. Dr. Bernardo Kastrup is someone who's developed an idea of analytical idealism, and it's kind of explained in the second half of his thesis title, A Consciousness-Only Ontology. Ontology being the sub-branch of metaphysics which describes specifically the nature of being. So it's the isness as opposed to the behavior of it. And to get straight into it, for your woo-woo alarms go off with universal consciousness and everything is consciousness, because again, like I said, there are so many associations, pseudoscientific associations with this, with New Age spirituality and so on, that it really muddies the water. So let me ground these ideas a little bit. So as we know, we've postulated a physical world as a very useful tool to explain our shared experience, but the crux of his endeavors and a lot of this category of mathematical and philosophical models that approach this are based on the fact that we don't actually have any data to directly verify its existence by definition, because it's meant to be outside of our experience. So what he proposes is, okay, let's not suppose this thing that we have no example of and don't know, even though it's a useful tool and it seems to work within our current paradigm. Let's maybe use the human mind as a useful microcosm to understand his proposed natural mind or universal consciousness, if you will. So what he would ask you to do is to consider dreams and to think about what a dream is. And we understand that when you're dreaming and you're running from a monster, or you have your teeth falling out, or whatever the dream might be, your experience is not mapped onto a physical world. What you are experiencing is essentially how the activity of your mind appears from a certain vantage point or perspective. Vantage point or perspective. So to demystify this a little bit more, or maybe make it even more confusing, his thesis is one that reality or experience is a dissociative process of the universal consciousness or the natural mind. Now, dissociation is a phenomenon that we are familiar with. It is a kind of forgetting that might be caused by trauma or by certain activities, such as being entrenched in a good book, or in a good book where you might essentially forget the outside world. You dissociate with the outside world, or through meditation or psychoactive substances, you might dissociate with internal experiences like that of the self. So it's all the process of forgetting. So to really drive this point home, what his thesis is largely based on as a metaphor or as a comparison is a condition called dissociative identity disorder. So people with DID, due to horrible long-term trauma during their childhood, essentially form separate alters within one mind, which have independent identities with their own experiences, their own memories, their own personalities, essentially. Or you can think of them as separate instances of consciousness, if you will, within one mind. But what really brings his perspective, his metaphysical worldview, what really grounds it, what makes it nowhere near as mystical as a lot of these ideas you might associate with, is the fact that these people with DID in the dream world, which is not mapped onto an external physical world, can interact from different vantage points as different characters, as different personalities. And here it becomes very clear that it is possible for at least for our local limited mind to manifest what looks like a physical world and to be experienced from different vantage points. So his concept is that, his claim is that essentially the fundamental nature of everything is consciousness and its forms, so experience, essentially, and that our awareness of the world is a product of this dissociative process. So it's about forgetting certain experiences. So you're within your own dissociative boundary, in which what's inside is what you know, what you identify with, and your perception of the activity of the universal mind across your dissociative boundary is your perception of the external world. And while this obviously raises a lot of questions of many types that I'm not quite in the position to disentangle, but what it does do is resolve all of these category problems that we discussed, as well as the presupposition of a world that is outside of our experience. So the reason I find this very intriguing and enlightening is because it is a parsimonious hypothesis to describe our experience without this major assumption that seems quite daunting once you realize it's in place, and really opens your mind to the fact that our perspective of the world is deeply controlled by some deeply held metaphysical assumptions which have historical context. And as scientists, I think it's very important to be aware of these things, to not let us be victims of scientific hubris, and really understand that our world is a lot more complicated and confusing than we might appreciate in certain respects. So on that note, thanks for listening, and any questions? Wow.